What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell here with another episode of You Got Boston. We're going to be diving into the NBA draft and who the Celtics might select with the number 28 and 32 picks, provided they keep those picks, because there is still a possibility that they end up somewhere totally different. There's a very open slate, I think, these next few weeks. But because I don't follow the draft all year long, I brought in two experts who do, Tyler Rucker of No Ceilings and Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo Sports. And basically, we're just going to let them tell us a little bit about the prospects that they're most excited about. Tyler has been doing this for a long time. Tyler, how long have you been doing this?
No ceilings. This is going to be our fourth year, but kind of been focusing on the draft my whole life. I'm one of those guys that grew up kind of geeking out about sports in general and the draft. So it's an exciting time of the year. I'm pumped to I grew up a Celtics fan too, so I'm even more excited about being on with you, Noah. So this is going to be an exciting draft.
Awesome. So, who better to bring on than somebody that's been following the draft their whole life? I've been a lifelong basketball fan, but I never got into the draft because I've always been discouraged by how hard it is to accurately predict who's going to be good. Like, I remember I think when I was little, I was like, okay, I'm excited about this prospect. And then they just like they never panned out. And I'd be like, okay, never mind. I'm not doing this. So, what is your approach when you're beginning the process? And I'm assuming you've even started looking at next year's, but how do you even start to begin when you have countless players that are all in different situations overseas, some seniors, freshmen, different positions, different conferences? Like, what's your thought process is just beginning to sort through all that?
Yeah, I think it's a lengthy process that takes a lot of tinkering and patience. You kind of get a foundation of like some of the names to start the year that you could be considering when it comes to like, hey, these can be names that are making noise to go up the ranks and be early first round picks, or even some second round picks. You're trying to say like, hey, these are intriguing guys that might not have the highest upside. Maybe they're a little bit older, but they could contribute. And with the NBA, I think there's now more importance for these draft picks to try to find some value with the CBA and everything. So when it comes to prospects and evaluating, you're trying to get an idea of the situation, the player. A lot of these teams are looking at these guys since they're in the high school ranks, so they have an idea of kind of what they are. But you're also trying to see how's the game developing, how are they projecting, is there a lot of upside still waiting to be unlocked, and then once you kind of also get to see like the film and the breakdown and in-person scouting, if you're able to, then it comes down to, getting intel and talking to teams around the league to kind of put everything together of like, hey, what makes this player tick? And, what type of individual are we investing in? So it's a lengthy process with a lot of different, check marks, that, if you want to call it that way. And it's a fun time, but you're just trying to also figure out who's got upside, but also the safest. And there's no such thing as a safe pick in the draft, but teams are trying to kind of minimize that risk factor, if you want to put it that way.
And then whenever I look at draft guides, it talks a lot about like the intangibles, the wingspans, their athleticism. How much just like the personality and work ethic and those things come into effect? Because you'd imagine that that stuff really matters once they're on the team. But are teams generally, to your understanding, kind of willing to just kind of go with the best basketball player and hope the rest works out, or is that really a big part of the process as well?
I think it's a huge part of the process. It's one of those parts where we a lot of fans and myself. It's easy to sit home and watch film and be like, okay, I like this guy for this reason. But teams are also we always say intel's gold. When it comes to scouting, you're trying to find out what makes this player tick and what are they going to be like on and off the court. A lot of these organizations are investing in teenagers and they're like, hey, we're going to give them millions of dollars. What's the trust factor here? What are they going to be like? Are they going to kind of settle once they get that first contract, or are they going to be a motivated player that's in the dog days of the regular season, they're still working hard around the clock? And I think you're also trying to figure out like, hey, how's this player fit with our roster? Is this a guy that's going to also bring chemistry and kind of be able to gel with everyone? So it's one of the most important things I think when it comes to evaluating for these teams. They're trying to figure out what type of individual, not just the player, but what type of individual are we investing in?
That makes sense. When you put it that way, it is you are giving millions of dollars to a teenager. And so if there's indications that they're not gonna be a good culture fit, like I can see that that would be a concern. Last question for you before we get into the potential Celtics prospects. Who would you say is your, if you have, not to put you in the spot, but your best prediction ever and your worst prediction?
Oh gosh, my best prediction ever. That's a tough one. I'll say my worst. My worst was, I had Franz Wagner as kind of like a late teens pick. I just kind of that was my first lesson of scouting where it was like, "Hey, don't get too high or too low from evaluating a bad stretch." And he had a tough, NCAA tournament run, so I kind of overthought that a little bit.
Mm.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the best. It's one of those I feel personally like myself, I always try to focus on like where I missed. And I'm always trying to be like, okay, well, why did I miss it that
The
way? And
Joe
how can I have
Mazzulla
gotten better?
mindset.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, I don't
You
like
gotta
to
get
try to
better. You
get,
just won
yeah.
the championship, it doesn't matter.
It's like, how can I get better right away? So I think Franz was always one that kind of stuck with me where I was just kind of like, okay, I could have seen that a little bit more. I kind of like to focus more on like seeing guys when I'm evaluating throughout the year, and I'll be like, he should be up a little bit higher. And then if they move up to, the talks, Keegan Murray, I feel like early in the year, I was like, this guy's gonna be a top 10 pick. What are we doing here? And then all of a sudden he ended up there. So I always
Mhm.
try to focus on my negatives because I'm like, how can I get better here? How can I, improve as an evaluator?
Very cool. It's a cool job. I'm glad people do it because, like I said, if you're covering a team all year the way that I do, like I'm familiar with the guys that made March Madness runs, but when I started looking through this list, I was like, I haven't heard half these names, to be frank. So let's start at the top. This is probably the most common name I've gotten submitted. Ryan Kalkbrenner from Creighton. What do you like about him? Why is he kind of coming up with the Celtics so much?
Yeah, so it's Kalkbrenner is an interesting one. He's been a older player, upperclassman, been at Creighton his whole career. Played 4 years, but he's really, really talented. He's gigantic. He's around 7'2". Very skilled and really, really good defensively. I think he was like 4-time defensive player of the year in the Big East. He also was a defensive player of the year in high school as well. So he's really talented on that side of the ball. A lot of teams I think just think like the upside might not be as high, but for the Celtics, I think it makes a lot of sense if this team looks like they're going to be going in a different direction with some trades. And Kalkbrenner might be one of those picks where you're just like, hey, this is a nice rotation piece that we could really add some depth early on and help us out. But might not be the highest upside, but this is a type of player that, I think with teams like the Celtics, where it's like, hey, you got to balance the CBA and the second apron, you might be saying, hey, this is a nice piece that could be in our rotation for years to come.
And you have him at 38. And I thought the Ringer has him at 35. Yahoo Sports at 29. So you think there's a good chance he'll be available when it's the Celtics' time to draft?
I think so. It's always tough with that end of the first round because I feel like then teams are always trying to find, like the playoff teams usually, if they're picking there, are trying to find those rotation pieces. And I think the bigs can come
Mm.
off a little quickly, and then all of a sudden teams are like, well, if we don't, jump at the opportunity here, we might not have them. The dream world is, that second pick the Celtics have, that top of the second round. I think Kalkbrenner would be great there, but it's one of those. I'm a big believer of like, hey, go get your guy. Don't risk it, and he might be a good option there.
Yeah, it's always funny when teams have two picks that are close to one another because you think to yourself, like, I might get him on the next one. And then if you pass it up, like how many stories do you hear about like this team passed up Tyrese Halliburton twice? Like, it makes it so much worse when you pass up your guy when you had multiple chances. But it sounds like he's somebody that I've heard the Luke Cornett comp a little bit. Would you say that's a pretty fair one?
Yeah, I think defensively, probably like a Luke Cornett minded of like, okay, he's a little bit better defensively than offensively. With Kalkbrenner, is just going to have some questions of like, okay, well, is he going to be more of like a system fit? Are you going to have to play drop with him if he's in there? But he's just so impactful, and I think he had like a +4 wingspan, so he's got great size and length. Knows his game. I feel like he's just really comfortable and humble about like, hey, this is how I'm going to make an impact on the court. He's shown he could shoot it a little bit from outside, but I would not be like saying, hey, this is a floor spacer. I think he's just going to be like one of those high floor defensive guys that really could give you some depth.
Awesome. Okay, Maxime Raynaud. Am I saying that right? Maxime?
Yeah,
What
Raynaud. I feel like I do this year round, and I struggle no with the pronunciation, so it's okay. So I think it's Maxime Raynaud from
Raynaud,
Stanford.
okay.
Yeah, he's a really talented one too. I think if he was on the board for the Celtics, it'd be a great fit. Obviously with Porzingis, they're trying to kind of figure out like, okay, if we're moving on from this, how do we replace that? And I think Raynaud could do a lot of stuff like that, where it's good size, good mobility for his size, and a really talented floor spacer. He does a lot of things off the bounce that kind of shock you for a player of his size. I don't know if he's going to be there. He's been a popular name right now, but definitely would be an interesting one for the Celtics if they could get him.
What's his downside? Because I'm thinking like a 7-footer that can space the floor, Sounds pretty good. Like, why is he not projected to go a little bit higher than the late first round potentially?
Yeah, I think when scouts are just kind of watching him, sometimes, with a player like that, if they're beaten up on teams that might not be as great competition, you're like, okay, how much of this is a little fool's gold? And
Mm.
then you're also wondering, okay, he's a big body, but how is he going to look for defending the perimeter if he gets switched out there? But that for a team like the Celtics, I think you just get to a point. There's too many positives where it could really help out. When it comes to the 3-point shooting and what he can do. He's a great athlete, much better than you'd expect for a player of that size. So he went to the combine, had a great process, looked really good in scrimmages. So I think he could be a name that goes a little higher, but he also could be on the board. This is going to be a draft where some names could slip.
And then sticking with bigs, Danny Wolf has been a popular one. I don't even know if to call him a big because I just watched his highlight tape and he looks like a guard. But what's your take on him and how do you kind of evaluate his potential chances in Boston?
I think he's one of the most interesting bigs in this class, maybe even players, because I keep joking he's the joker in the deck for this draft class. Because you ask around the league, and some teams love him, and some teams are like, "Oh, I've got him late first." So there's a wide range with a lot of prospects, but I think Danny Wolf's one of the biggest ones because it's kind of a eye of the beholder. I mean, you have a big with that size, around 7 foot 250, but he's got guard skills. He's just really unique, great playmaking. So you know, I think he'd be a dream for the Celtics. You're talking about someone that could probably come in and be that Al Horford type, and he's also shown he could be a floor spacer, really smart player. So Danny Wolf would be a great get if they could get him. That it might be a point where they have to move up a little bit if they could, but I think he'd be a great addition for that roster. Fits really well with what they were trying to do.
So between those three bigs, I think those are the three names you sent me. Is he the one that you're the most excited about, or do you think it's a little bit of a toss up?
Yeah, I think if they were able to land someone like Danny Wolf, that would be a heck of a get for this team because I just think he could come in and he's a great playmaker. He's got good feel. His numbers, Michigan last year kind of asked him to do everything. I mean, he was basically running the offense at times. So I think his numbers will get even better when he's able to be a little bit more efficient. Had some struggles with turnovers, but it was mainly just because they gave him the ball so much. So I think Danny kind of fitting alongside what they want and his playmaking. You could kind of run the offense through him sometimes, and he could stretch out. I think it would be a great fit for them. So yeah, Danny Wolf would be probably the number one on my list if I was the Celtics.
Prizepicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prizepicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prizepicks. This year's basketball playoffs are headed towards crowning a first-time champ in more than 50 years. Don't miss your last chance to cash in on history with Prizepicks. Pick more or less on player stats like points, rebounds, assists, and more for your shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this basketball season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports takes into real money all season long on PrizePicks. My pick this week, I feel pretty good about assuming SGA will score at least 30 points as he has for most of the season. So that's what I'm going with. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And then the guards, Cam Jones out of Marquette. Every time I see like a 6'3" kind of like well-rounded guard, I'm like, that seems to be like a safer bet than some of these other prospects. What's your take on him?
He's one I'm really curious to kind of see about with when it comes to these next couple of weeks leading up to the draft. Last year he had a fantastic season with Marquette, and then all of a sudden they lost a couple players to the draft. Oso Ighodaro and Tyler Kolek. So I was like, oh, this might be tough because now he's going to get all of the responsibilities, and having that efficient year might be really tough to double down on. And he had good numbers this year, but they just weren't as efficient as you'd want. So Cam's just one that kind of makes some sense to me with the Celtics, maybe in that second round pick because he's got some good size, he's got some toughness, and he can do some things off the bounce to get his own shot. So it's one of those names that I think a lot of other names have been considered for like Celtics and projecting, and I'm like, hey, Cam Jones might make some sense at some point if the board plays off the right way.
And he seems to be like a more likely to be available by their picks from what I'm seeing. I don't know. I mean, I know the projections are just projections, but Yahoo Sports, The Ringer, No Ceilings, you guys all have him still available by the
Yeah,
Celtics 2 draft picks. So he seems like somebody that maybe is a little bit of a backup plan, something like
yeah,
that.
I think he could be in conversation. I think maybe with that second round pick would probably make some sense. And I think you're always going to have a couple names, but um, especially with the format now these days where it's two nights, I think having some options with that second pick, you just got to kind of trust it because you never know. You could have a name that you're thinking you're going to get on day two, and then all of a sudden someone trades up right in front of them and snags them. So Cam's just one I'd be like, okay, maybe this is a little outside the box that could be in play here.
And then Ben Saraf, 19 years old out of Israel. What's your take on his upside downside here?
Yeah, it's one of those ranges with this draft. It's a really deep guard draft. So I know the Celtics are kind of set right now when you look at their roster with guards. But if they do somehow keep these picks, I'm like, okay, well, what position can you add to? And because how deep this draft is in that first round, I think there could be some surprising names that slip a little bit. And Ben Saraf could be one of those. He's probably a name a lot of people are going to think is going to be in the top 20, but we're getting to a point where a lot of teams think like all these guys are going to go in the top 20. And I'm like, there's more than 20 names here. So someone's going to slip a little bit. But he's a lefty with good size, fantastic playmaking ability, a lot of Goran Dragic vibes for those, familiar with that. So good feel for the game. The shot just needs to come around, but he'd be a really good if he's on the board. I think the Celtics would be like, oh man, this is a great pick for us. So just smart player, good feel for the game.
What's the when I obviously you hear that a lot, like the shot needs to just come around. What's the biggest indicators you look at to evaluate whether that shot is going to come around or not?
Yeah, I think you're looking for consistency with like the shooting form and everything. You've seen some guys in recent years. I loved Ryan Dunn last year as a prospect, and everyone was like, he can't shoot it at all. And I'm like, I don't know if it's he can't shoot or there's just confidence that needs to be unlocked. And he looked much better to start the year. But when it comes to, evaluating these guys, you just want to see if there's some confidence building or the foundation looks good. Then obviously you can break it down to like, hey, does the upper half need to be tinkered with? Does the lower body? But for me, I just want to see like, hey, if it does it at least look like everything's on the right page right now? It just needs some reps, or is this something where everything's a little bit off?
And then Liam McNeeley out of UConn. Thoughts on him?
Yeah, McNeeley is a really interesting one, and I know the Celtics took Baylor Shireman last year, which I think he's going to surprise some people in his next season. But McNeeley could be an option that's on the board that I think would be a little bit of like a Brad Stevens special. And what I mean by that is he was a projected lottery pick to start the year. Played with Cooper Flagg and Derek Queen at Montverde. He was a really talented player. And just the season kind of didn't live up to the expectations. But he's got good size. He's a 6'8" floor spacer with some toughness and rebounding ability for a forward, a wing. So I wonder if he's on the board there. It could be just like, hey, let's get another one. Let's get another guy that could come in here and have high intangibles and a big time recruit where we've seen the Celtics do that before. So McNeeley, I think, is going to be one of those names that's in that 25 to 30 range. And I think some team at one point is going to be like, we're not going to pass this up. This kid checks a lot of boxes. Let's see what we got. So he's one of those names I just keep an eye on.
And the last one you sent me here is one that I'm excited about because, as I mentioned, I've only been following college basketball. Walter Clayton from Florida. What are your kind of thoughts on him? And I will say, I know Al Horford when he after the national championship, he was like, maybe this is a guy that ends up with us. I don't even know if Al Horford's going to be back, but that would be a nice little full circle story there.
I think he'd be a really fun addition for this team. It'd be the ultimate Missoula Ball edition, just kind of the floor spacer who can get red hot in a hurry. And obviously this team's gonna have some interesting questions when it comes to like, hey, what's it gonna look like next year? I know they have Pritchard, who's been fantastic. Maybe they give him a little bit more responsibility, but Clayton just is one of those like, hey, let's get some more firepower and a player that has really had a good path to where he got to. He started at Iona and then kind of worked his way to Florida. And He's just been fantastic. He had a really great year. So I think it'd be one of those players you're just getting some more firepower in that backcourt and someone that could really light it up and give you a boost. And obviously they're gonna try to find some guys that can come in early and make an impact with Tatum out and everything. So Clayton would be a great addition, especially if they could get him at that first pick.
And then when you look at a guy like him, who obviously the scoring, the shooting is an upside, but then defensively there are questions. Like, how do you kind of work through those questions? Because I feel like in today's NBA, you don't really want a guy on the floor who's a defensive liability, right? Like that's even held Pritchard and Hauser off the floor at times, and they're not really defensive liabilities anymore. So, like, what are the things that you look for to see, like, is this a guy that's going to be able to overcome the defensive questions, or like maybe his offense is going to be so great that it's worth whatever defensive concerns there are.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things, especially when you're trying to project it to these teams. Is you're Whenever I was coming up in this and taking it serious, I would ask scouts like kind of the similar question, and they would be like, "Hey, the first thing we're trying to find is like what's their NBA skill, what's getting them on the court."
Mm,
So when I'm evaluating these guys, I'm trying to find that same thing. Like, okay, is it the offense? Is there a lot of stuff that he can do offensively that could get him on the court? And then when I'm watching the defense. I'm like, is there stuff that's going to take him off the court? Is there stuff you can't keep him out there for? With Clayton, I think there's just some, he battles, he cares. Like there's some good stuff there. Obviously, he's a little bit undersized, but I think it comes down to like, hey, there's a lot of offensive things that are going to bring him on the court, keep him on the court.
mm.
So as long as it's not like, hey, he's going to be a target and everyone's going to be attacking him, I think teams are going to say, hey, if we have a good foundation around him, we're still going to want to lean on what he can do on the court. So I think Clayton would be a great fit just because of what this team does and how Missoula gets guys to play great on defense and buy in. I think that would be a great addition.
And not to put you in the spot, but if you could pick two of the guys that we just went through, who's your dream two for 28 and 32? Assuming they stay in that range, which
Yeah,
again, I,
right.
I think there's a good chance they don't. Like, I think anything can happen. But assuming they stay in that range, who's your dream two targets from the ones we discussed?
I think if everything played out perfectly, they could get Danny Wolf and Ryan Kalkbrenner, or excuse me, and
Okay.
Walter Clayton Jr. I
Okay.
wasn't going to double down on Biggs. I don't know if Danny's going to be there, but that would be a dream is if they could somehow get him and then maybe you get a guard like Kalkbrenner later or Clayton. There you go. See, I'm like Celtics fans. All
Mhm.
I think about is Kalkbrenner right now. So
It's amazing.
um,
I posted like who do people like, and I was like probably 100 people responded Kalkbrenner. And
it's
then I looked
funny.
into him and I was like, I feel like he might just be like a very classic prospect.
I had one of my colleagues at No Ceilings had a good way of saying it. He said it's like taking a guard in the NFL draft in the first round. And I was like, that's a good way. So Kalkbrenner would be that way, but Danny Wolf would be very exciting. And then if they could get someone like Walter Clayton later, I think that would be great. So we'll see if that could happen. But I'm like you. I'm wondering if they're going to stay. I feel like they might even have to try to go up a little bit.
They might, and maybe there's a way to make a trade where they shed a little bit of salary, move up a little bit. The world is their oyster. It's been hard for me. I don't do like trade rumors or like mock things because I just feel like I don't even know where to start. Like
Yeah.
literally anything can happen. Once like the first trade happens, I'll work from there. Last thing I wanted to ask you is just the last couple years, JD Davison, Jordan Walsh, Baylor Shireman, Anton Watson. What did you think about those picks? Did you have guys that you really wanted them to draft that you were like, they were there, you should have grabbed that guy? Like what are your thoughts on how the last few drafts have gone?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting the last couple drafts because I understood when they were kind of moving back and trying to shed some salary. The one year I really wanted them to take Shireman last year. I thought going into the draft,
Mm,
I was like, hey, if Shireman's on the board for the Celtics, it would be an absolute dream. And he had an outstanding combine process, so I was like, I don't even know if he's going to be there. And from everything I had heard, I think they were a little surprised he was there too. So that was just one of those picks where I was like, I really like Shireman with this team. I think I thought like year two or year three, he's going to take that really big, like, oh, this is a piece to have around. So, other guys were just like, I understood the value. I understood the upside with Jordan Walsh. I thought it was like, hey, it's one of the players I was a little lower on, but I was like, at that point, it made a lot of sense because there was just so much potential defensively and see if what he can do this year. But it's going to be interesting this draft with this team because I feel like it's a little different story now than a lot of us were expecting as Celtics fans. But I think there's really good value for them to find some pieces that could help a lot earlier than people are expecting.
awesome. I think, yeah, they definitely, I think people are more interested in the draft this year than previous years because it felt like in the past, like it's probably a guy who's going to be up in Maine all year. Like even Baylor spent most half the year in Maine, right? And he was probably ready on most teams. He would have probably spent the year with their parent club and on the court, and he looked great in March. So I'm very high on Baylor. We actually have Baylor coming onto the show. Actually, by the time this comes out, Baylor will have been on. So, um, Tyler, thank you so much. This is super helpful. I appreciate all the work you guys put into it. I know you have an awesome draft guide. I just bought it. I'm going to be looking through everything so that this year, when I'm live and they call a player, I will know everything about them. So, anything else you want to plug besides for the draft guide? Where can people find your work? Where should people start if they're just kind of diving into everything?
Yeah, we're at NoCeilingsNBA.com. We've got write-ups about pretty much all the prospects in the draft. We try to cover everyone from guys that are going top 5 to potential, two-way guys. We try to give everyone our spotlight. So, NoCeilingsNBA.com is absolutely free. And then we've got the draft guide that's 100 prospects with in-depth write-ups. So thank you, Noah, for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day.